Hello, team players. So in my last teamwork build, I built a summoner wizard that was designed for Kingmaker. However, we can't very well build a team without multiple party members. So today I'm going to be building the Duelist General, a build that is designed to work with that summoner wizard. Let's dive in. Okay, for today's ancestry, we're going with the Warren-bred Hobgoblin. And for our class, we're going to be going with the Fighter. Since we're playing a fighter in Kingmaker, we want to be the general of our kingdom's army. And Hobgoblins make excellent generals. For background, we're going to go with Local Brigand. The main reason for this is for the ability boosts, but training and intimidation will also help. Group coercion isn't a huge factor. Banditry lore will help us strategize against bandits, since we're going to run into those sooner or later. The starting stats for this build should be Strength 4, Dexterity 0, Constitution 1, Intelligence 3, Wisdom 0, and Charisma 1. You will want to increase your Dexterity as you level up, but right now, you can wear heavy armor. The main reason for that is so we can get better and better with bows. It's going to be important. Our first class feat for this build is going to be Combat Assessments. This allows us to make a melee strike, and if we hit, we can make a recall knowledge about the creature that we hit. On a critical hit, we get a +2 bonus on our recall knowledge, which as a fighter, we're gonna get a lot of crits. This is one of the reasons why our intelligence is so high. As a general, one of our jobs is to strategize about the enemy. And what better way to do that than to be able to attack and find out about the enemy at the same time. And we will, of course, also need our ancestry feats. We're going to be taking Remorseless Lash. When you hit a frightened foe with a melee strike, that foe can't reduce their frightened condition below 1 until the beginning of their next turn. So if we frighten the right enemy, this could make them frightened for one more round. For our level 2 feat, I've gone with Combat Grab. This requires us to have a free hand, but we can make a melee strike, and if we hit, we can grab the target without making an athletics check. That creature remains grabbed until the end of our next turn, or it escapes, whichever comes first. After all, we need a way to get that circumstance penalty to AC on enemies if we can't flank. And this requires no athletics check. We just automatically do it, which is pretty nice. At level 3, it's time for general feats, and again, I'm going to cover all these now, because you can pretty much take these in any order you want. We are, of course, going to need Die Hard, Toughness, and Kenny Acumen, this time for our will saves. We're also going to need Fleet to give us a little more speed, and Incredible Scouts. This is another reason why we need to increase our dexterity. As to Scout, we need to be able to stealth. But why do we need a scout? Well, it's, again, so we can find out more about enemies, as we may or may not have a rogue in the party. For level 4, I've gone with Dueling Parry to help us with our AC, because the more AC we have, the better. And this will give us the same bonus that we would get from raising a steel shield without the actual shield, since for this build, we need to keep a hand free. For our level 5 ancestry feat, we're going to go with Recognize Ambush. This allows us to draw our weapon as part of our initiative. Thus, we now never have to spend an action on our turn pulling out our weapon. As soon as it's our turn, we can immediately move and start attacking, which is great for a general. For today's first teamwork reports, since we always have a hand free, we can always do every single athletics attack action there is. That includes grappling, tripping, and disarming, since, disarm is actually good now. And don't forget, with Combat Grab, we can grab a target without making an athletics check. But there's more to this build than just athletics attack action. After all, we have high intelligence, which means recall knowledge is also part of this build, especially with combat assessments. And we can also draw a weapon as part of our initiative thanks to Recognize Ambush. And we will want to at least try to frighten foes, even if our charisma isn't great at this point. Because Remorseless Lash will keep them frightened. And frightened does stack with the off-guard condition that we get from tripping or grappling foes. And remember, Remorseless Lash works anytime we hit a frightened foe, even if we're not the ones that frighten them. Overall, our main goal is to be a backup for the wizard if he fails on his recall knowledge, and to get those circumstance penalties to armor class, especially flanking with the wizard's summons. But remember, with this build, our wisdom isn't great, so we're going to need somebody else to do wisdom-based recall knowledge checks. But that's where my future Kingmaker teamwork builds will come into play. Alright, for level 6, we're going to take Dazing Blow. If we have a foe grabbed, then we can make a melee strike against them, and if we hit, then they have to make a fortitude saving throw. The foe might be anywhere from stun 1 to stun 3, depending on how they do on their save. Keep in mind, this does have the press trait, which means you must be suffering from multiple attack penalty to use this feat. However, getting rid of enemies' actions is always good, especially if you can get that stun 3 and make them completely waste their turn. Keep in mind that while you do have to have a multiple attack penalty to use this feat, they're also off guard because you have them grabbed, which effectively means you aren't taking as much of a multiple attack penalty, especially if you're using an agile weapon for this strike. Next at level 8, we have Disorienting Opening. Now we can make a foe off guard if we hit them with our reactive strike. So even if we fail with our grapple or trip attempt, we can still make them off guard. To everyone and not just us. Highly recommend this feat. For our level 9 Ancestry feat, we'll be taking Squad Tactics. So, if an enemy is within your reach and that of at least 2 of your allies, it is off guard against you. So even if 2 of our allies are flanking a foe, we can still get the off guard condition if we're near that flank, without actually flanking ourselves. Next we have Disarming Twist. This is another press trait action, but we can make a melee strike, and if we hit or critically hit, this strike also gains the effects of the success and critical success effects of the disarm action. In addition, if we miss, the foe is still off guard until the end of our current turn. Thus, this does make it a little easier for us to hit if we decide to attack on our third action, especially again if we're using an agile weapon. At level 12, we'll be taking Dueling Dance. This is a stance, and while we're in this stance, we always gain the benefits of Dueling Parry. So we no longer have to use an action every turn to get that +2 bonus to AC. For our level 13 Ancestry feat, we're going to be taking Can't Fall Here. This essentially allows you to use a reaction to give an adjacent and willing ally the Orc Ferocity reaction. So if they would fall to 0 hit points but not be killed, they don't fall unconscious and instead are at 1 hit points. This also gives them temporary hit points equal to your level for 1 minute. However, your ally's wounded condition still increases by 1. This will help us keep an ally up so they can help the party even more. This will especially be useful if our lieutenant goes down when we're fighting in our army. Then, opening stance will let us go right into one of our stances whenever we roll initiative. However, since we also have Recognized Ambush, we're going to have to decide when we roll initiative whether we want to enter a stance or draw our weapon, since they both have the same trigger and you can only use 1 free action per trigger. Moving on to level 16, we'll be taking Tactical Reflexes. This gives us an extra reaction that we can only use for reactive strike, thus allowing us to make 2 reactive strikes if we want, which will go extremely well with our Disorienting Opening. Our last Ancestry feat for this build is going to be Rallying Cry. Once per day, for 2 actions, we can give all allies within 30 feet temporary hit points equal to our level. In addition, all these allies are also quickened for 1 minute, but they can only use the extra action to stride, step, or strike. This is temporary hit points and great action economy for the entire party, as 30 feet is a pretty big area. But this does apply to the wizard summons, meaning the wizard has to spend 1 action to sustain the spell, but the summon gets 3 actions, which is downright insane. And the wizard can use the extra action to do something like stride. Okay, this is where I stopped the wizard build, but it was pointed out to me in my comments that the Kingmaker Adventure Path in 2e goes all the way to level 20. So, for level 18, we're going to be taking Guiding Finish. This action does have the press trait. However, we can make a melee strike, and if we hit, we can reposition the target up to 10 feet. And we can move the target through our space with this feat. If we fail, we move the target 5 feet instead of 10, just so we can move the target to where we want them to be, such as in a flanking position between our allies or between the wizard summon and ourselves. And finally, for level 20, we're going to take Weapon Supremacy. We are permanently quickened, but we can only use the extra action to strike. This does mean that Rallying Cry and other feats like it will no longer affect us, because we're already quickened. But they will still affect our allies, and that's what's important. For Teamwork Report number 2, it's going to be especially important that we use agile weapons, as we have a lot of feats that have the press traits. And these feats allow us to attack and debuff the foe without making another check. So our second attack is going to be hugely important. So the less of a multiple attack penalty we can get, the better. So you may want to take Agile Grace instead of Tactical Reflexes. It all depends on how your GM runs your campaign and what other party members you have. Either way, grappling and tripping, as well as disarming, are going to be your bread and butter in this build, as well as recall knowledge. But like I said earlier, you're going to have to rely on another party member for wisdom-based recall knowledge. But if you're playing this with the wizard build that I did last time, then flanking with the wizard summon is going to be important. But even when you can't do that, you're still going to be able to gain the off-guard condition by tripping and grappling foes, as well as moving them into flanking positions. Now, let's talk about free archetype. There are actually a number of archetypes that you could take with this build that would really help it out. Obviously, Duelist and Aldori Duelist would help this build significantly, as would Lore Master and Eldritch Researcher if you want a little magic. But the one that I picked for this build was the Martial archetype. Until you can manage to get Rallying Cry, the most important feats from the Martial archetype are going to be Cadence Call and Tactical Cadence, as those will allow you to quicken allies even sooner. However, even when you do get Rallying Cry, these feats are still going to be important, as Rallying Cry is a once per day thing, whereas those feats you can use once per minute. Your martial stance is also going to be important here. I went with Dread Martial stance because fear is such a good condition. However, you can go with pretty much any stance you want. It all depends on whether you're trained in diplomacy or deception. For the rest of the martial feats, you can pretty much take what you want, as in the right situation, they're all pretty good. I want to give a huge thank you to Underhill for being a channel member. Also, remember guys, that you can use code TEAMGAMING for 10% off a starter pack of Dubby Energy, which I use whenever I make these videos. Link is in the description below. But if you guys want to learn more about the martial archetype, or you'd like to see the wizard build that goes with this build, you can check out these videos here. Thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, teamwork is vital. It helps us solve problems.